A teenager helped a lost elderly man at the airport, but when the man revealed who he really was, the boy couldn't believe it. Everyone around stopped to listen. Daniel's sneakers squeaked faintly against the polished tiles of the Heathrow Airport departure terminal. At 17, his worn hoodie and patched jeans stood out among the polished suits and designer dresses bustling past him. His backpack, slung over one shoulder, weighed heavily with textbooks he couldn't afford to leave at home. Dodging luggage carts and groups of travelers, he found a quiet bench near Gate 15, his usual spot to wait while his mother worked the cleaning shifts she had taken to make ends meet. Daniel sat down, pulling out his physics book. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since the toast his mother made before leaving their small flat early that morning. The sound of announcements echoed overhead, blending with a symphony of accents from tourists and business people. As he flipped through the pages, his eyes occasionally wandered to his mother, Maria, visible through the large glass windows, meticulously scrubbing a smudge off the marble floor. Her hunched shoulders and tired movements spoke volumes about the years she had worked tirelessly. His focus shifted when a commotion nearby caught his attention. An elderly man had tripped over his suitcase, scattering papers, a leather wallet, and a pill bottle across the floor. The man, dressed in a rumpled blazer, seemed disoriented as he tried to push himself up. The people around him barely spared a glance before continuing on their way. Daniel hesitated, the weight of past experiences pinning him to his seat. The memory of being accused of shoplifting simply for picking up a dropped item resurfaced, but he shook it off and approached the man. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, kneeling beside him. The man looked up, his pale blue eyes filled with embarrassment. I just lost my balance," he muttered, his voice trembling slightly. Daniel began gathering the man's belongings, carefully placing them back in the open suitcase. "Here, let me help you," Daniel offered, extending a hand. The man hesitated before gripping it. His hand was cold, his grip weak. Daniel helped him to his feet, noticing a slight tremor in the man's movements. "I'm Samuel," the man said, brushing off his blazer, "and I seem to have made quite a mess of things." Daniel smiled faintly. "I'm Daniel. Happens to the best of us." He glanced at the boarding pass sticking out of Samuel's pocket. The flight information showed a departure to Edinburgh at 2:30 p.m. Daniel checked the time on his old watch, 2:45 p.m. "It looks like you've missed your flight," Daniel said gently. Samuel's face paled further. "Missed? Oh no, I can't miss this trip." He fumbled with his boarding pass, his hands shaking as he tried to read the fine print. "I was running late, the taxi got stuck in traffic, and—" His voice trailed off, his anxiety mounting. Daniel noticed the man's labored breathing and the beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. "Let's find the airline desk," Daniel said, picking up the suitcase. "Maybe they can help." Samuel nodded, his movements slow and uncertain. As they walked, Daniel noticed the stares from other passengers. A security guard's eyes lingered on him a little too long, but Daniel kept moving, focusing on Samuel's need for help rather than his own discomfort. At the airline desk, the attendant, a young woman with a tight bun, typed quickly into her computer. Her expression turned apologetic. "I'm sorry, sir. The next available flight to Edinburgh isn't until tomorrow morning." Samuel's shoulders slumped, and he muttered something under his breath about needing to be there tonight. Daniel leaned in. "Is there any way to get him on another airline? It's urgent." The attendant shook her head. "All flights to Edinburgh are fully booked for today." Samuel sank into a nearby chair, his hands covering his face. Daniel crouched beside him. "What's so important in Edinburgh?" he asked softly. Samuel lowered his hands, revealing tear-filled eyes. "My grandson," he said, his voice breaking. "He's undergoing a critical surgery tomorrow. I promised I'd be there to hold his hand." Daniel's heart clenched. He thought of his own struggles with his absent father and how his mother had always been there for him, no matter what. "We'll figure something out," Daniel said, more to himself than to Samuel. "I need my medications." Samuel added, his voice weaker now. "They're in my suitcase, which was already checked in for the flight." Daniel's mind raced. The man's pale complexion and shaking hands were signs he couldn't ignore. He glanced around, spotting a nearby information kiosk. Wait here, he told Samuel before hurrying over to the attendant. After explaining the situation, Daniel returned with a staff member who promised to retrieve the medications from the baggage hold. It'll take some time, the staff member warned, but Daniel nodded. Thank you, he said earnestly. As they waited, Samuel's condition seemed to deteriorate. His breathing grew shallow, and his hands trembled more violently. Daniel ran to a nearby cafe and spent the last of his pocket money on a cup of chamomile tea. Here, he said, handing it to Samuel. This should help. Samuel took the cup with both hands, his grip unsteady. Thank you, he murmured, sipping slowly. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from his mother. Where are you? My shift is almost over. He glanced at Samuel, then back at his phone. Guilt gnawed at him. He knew his mother would worry if he wasn't at their usual spot when her shift ended. But he couldn't leave Samuel alone in this state. The staff member returned with Samuel's medications and a bottle of water. Here you go, sir, she said, placing them in his lap. Samuel quickly took a pill, his hands still trembling. You're a good boy, he said, looking at Daniel with gratitude. Not many would have stopped to help. It's nothing, Daniel replied, feeling a mix of pride and discomfort. He wasn't used to such direct praise. Samuel leaned back in his chair, his breathing gradually steadying. You remind me of someone, he said after a moment. My late wife. She always said kindness is the one thing you can give that costs nothing but means everything. Daniel's phone buzzed again, another message from his mother. He knew he needed to explain the situation, but how? Would she understand? Before he could decide, Samuel spoke again. I don't know how I'm going to get to Edinburgh, he said, his voice tinged with despair. Daniel's thoughts raced. He considered options, wondering if there was a train or even a bus that could get Samuel there in time. Let me check something, he said, pulling out his phone. He searched for alternatives, but every option seemed too slow or too expensive. As he weighed the possibilities, Daniel's mother appeared, her cleaning uniform slightly wrinkled and her expression a mix of worry and relief. Daniel, where have you been? I've been looking everywhere. She stopped when she saw Samuel, her eyes softening. What's going on here? Daniel quickly explained the situation. His mother listened intently, her tired eyes narrowing with concern. We can't just leave him like this, she said firmly. Let me make a call. She stepped aside, pulling out her phone and speaking in a tone Daniel had rarely heard, a mix of authority and compassion. Minutes later, she returned, a faint smile on her face. I spoke to the supervisor at the airline. They're arranging a hotel room for Mr. the Faf Samuel tonight and guaranteeing him a seat on the first flight to Edinburgh tomorrow morning. They're also retrieving his checked luggage so he can have his belongings tonight. Samuel's eyes widened with gratitude. I don't know how to thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Daniel's mother waved a hand dismissively. No need. Just take care of yourself and get to your grandson. As airport staff escorted Samuel to the hotel, he turned to Daniel one last time. You've done more for me than I could ever repay, he said, pressing something into Daniel's hand. It was a small card, embossed with golden letters. Samuel Henderson, founder of the Horizon Scholars Program. Daniel's brows furrowed as he read the card. Horizon Scholars? He asked. Samuel nodded. It's a foundation I started to support students from disadvantaged backgrounds. We provide full scholarships, mentorships, and opportunities to those who need them most. He paused, his gaze steady. You've shown the kind of character we look for, Daniel. If you're interested, I'd like to discuss your future. Daniel's breath caught. He glanced at his mother, who was wiping away tears with the sleeve of her uniform. This could change everything, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Samuel smiled. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness lead to the biggest changes. With that, he walked away, leaving Daniel and his mother standing in stunned silence. As they made their way home, the weight of the day's events began to sink in. The bills on their kitchen table no longer felt as oppressive. The future, which had once seemed so uncertain, now glimmered with possibility. Daniel held the card tightly, feeling a sense of hope he hadn't known in years. Together, he and his mother stepped into their small flat, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that kindness and perseverance could open doors they had never imagined.